Okie dokie. And here I am, and there you are. So, and welcome you, and I'm very glad to see you, all of my wild darlings, my tiny army of literature loving Sunday night party people. Good to have you with me. I'm Tad. I'm still Tad. I plan on being Tad for a while yet. I will be reading in just a short while from The Sword and the Stone. And it's not a lot else to talk about tonight. I mentioned during the previous broadcast, or reading, or whatever you want to call it, that we had some family come out from Minnesota, drove out, which is a hideously long drive, like 26 hours or something. Anyway, they're on their way back now, so we're wishing them a safe trip, and it was lovely having them. But other than that was a great deal of the week, at least in terms of, kind of staying open, not going out and doing anything because we weren't always sure when they would arrive and when they were going to leave and things like that. So not a lot to report in terms of extracurriculars. Whenever I had time, I continued working on The Splintered Sun, which is beginning to round into shape in terms of, it's hard to explain, but what kind of a book it is, what kind of a read it is, I guess, more than anything else. Because as I've mentioned before, I've been messing about trying to decide how I best want to tell the story. But I've already said all of that before, so I won't bore you with it again. Meanwhile, dogs, reasonably good. Both old and weird, but they were old and weird, a year ago. They're just older and weirder, which also, I suppose, could be said about me as well, and that's also a fair assessment, I think. Still, as you can see in the background here, still have not really gotten to the office stuff yet. I've been putting it off because there have been so many other things going on, and in part also just because it just depresses me to think about having to do all of this again. The whole moving thing was psychologically very rough on yours truly. Not in any sense trying to elevate the quality of my own suffering. And in fact, my wife Deb went through at least as much stress and hassle over it as I did, if not more. But I am particularly, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm kind of hermetic by nature. And part of how I work is that I like to have a lot of quiet time, and I do my thinking first, and then I sit down and write. And I also need to know where things are because a lot of my research is still out of books. I have books that I know have things in them that I want, but I've had all my books in boxes for really the last year and a half, which is something I had to go through before, and I hate it. Every move means books and things get packed away, and not just books, but all the other sort of daily life things that, you need to kind of deal with, things like, where are my needle nose pliers? There's an emergency and I need needle nose pliers, all that kind of stuff. So as a result, I have procrastinated. I freely admit it. I have procrastinated. I've put it off, and I will not be able to put it off too much longer. I have to assume now that we are going to stay in place for a good long time. I certainly hope so. I offer my prayers on scented incense up to heaven that we do not have to move again for any reason, and that I can finally get the office kicked into shape and all of that. It's also because I was waiting to see what was going to happen with the cats, and if they were going to continue to live with us or if they were going to go live with somebody else, because of course they're not strictly speaking my cats. They are my grand cats, I suppose, for lack of a I'm not good with things like that, but I love animals. So, but calling them my grandchildren is a step too far, really. But anyway, those of you who have animals will understand this. So because of that, their stuff is just sprawled all over the room, especially out of sight of what you can see on this camera here. So I have put that off too. So this whole embarrassing series of admissions are about absolutely nothing in terms of informing anybody out there about anything useful. So what is useful? Working on the new book. The Navigator's Children is finally about to come out after we had thought originally it was going to come out last November, but for various reasons, that did not happen. It is definitely coming out this November, though. And so I am going to be pleased to have that finally out in public so everybody can react. There are many interesting and strange twists and turns, which I look forward to hearing from readers about, even if some of them do not please readers or outrage readers or whatever they may do, because part of the reason for writing a story, especially a story set in a previously visited universe, as The Navigator's Children and its preceding volumes does, is that you want to ring some changes. You want to make things happen. You want to see, how a place that you're trying to make as realistic as possible changes over time. And for those of us who have achieved a certain age in life where, many of us have reproduced, it sounds like binary fission. No, we did it the old-fashioned way. We had children. But, for those of us who've gone through that and suddenly, your perspective changes, you see things differently, you experience the world differently, your priorities change, etc. So in writing these books, I definitely wanted to bring that more current perspective to the book. But, so I also want people to see, because most of the stuff happens. The plots get resolved, the character arcs finish, the characters have various different fates. Many questions get answered, including some that readers were probably not even asking because they're not as detail freaky as I am. I think at one point I went back, not in this book, but I believe in one of the earlier books, I went back along the way and addressed a bunch of stuff that I had encountered in the first set of books, the Dragonbone Chair, etc., that had bothered me and that I wanted to explain why those things were true. So that's also been in this book. So there are probably things that people will find out that they had never cared about one way or the other, but that had been bugging me, and I had done my best to clarify. So with all that said, that's really the only news at the moment. So I am going to just go and check and see if I can read questions. Okay, I'll come back to that. I see I have a mail that I have to have a look at, and I will. I see Isaac has checked in. And Jeremy, hello, Jeremy. Let me see who else might have shown up. Ruby, I see Ruby. Hello, Ruby. Ruby and I are related, kind of, sort of. And we go way back to when Ruby was a girl and I was like a teenager, I think. We were related for a while by marriage. Anyway, so lovely to see you, Ruby, as always. Emily, hello. Good to see you too. Renee, I see. Claudia, hello. Rochelle Killen-Branton, that's a new name. Hello, Rochelle. Thank you for joining us. What a pleasure to have you. Tracy McClatchy is not a new name. Tracy, of course, is a very familiar name. Hello, Tracy. And there's Barban. And Rita Guidarelli, if I'm pronouncing it, might be Guidarelli, depending on how people like to pronounce things. And Patty Pope and Christy Sanders. So those are the people who have checked in so far. And I will be, as I said, reading in just a minute. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to talk about. I'm not... It's interesting. I at one point along the way, I remember Deb saying to me, you should be reading more contemporary fantasy so you know what people are doing in the field, so you're not, doing the same thing. And I thought about that. And the fact is that I'm not reading much fantasy at all these days. Nothing to do with the quality of the work that's being done by other writers. Everything to do with, first of all, I mostly am interested in nonfiction these days because it's an important part of how I do my writing. Also just because genre fiction in general is something that I like to move from genre to genre, not just read one genre. And I read lots of other kinds of fiction as well, including old favorites, many of them have nothing to do with science fiction or fantasy. But more importantly, what I realized, let me adjust this a little bit. More importantly, what I realized was thinking about what Deb said, and yeah, am I not being fair to myself? And I realized actually that after some thought that most of what drives me to write and most of what I am trying to reach, I guess, for lack of a better word, in my fiction are things that really, kind of solidified for me back when I was a teenager. And I mean, that's one reason I write in genre fiction, because it was something that I grew up with, that was, kind of my own place to be, my own book to read, my own world to live in, as it were, when I was 12, 13, 14. But also because it gives you a huge continuum of things you can write about, as long as you, I've said this before, as long as you obey or at least humor certain genre traits or things that the audience is expecting. But beyond that point, you can be as literary as you want. You can be as simplistic as you want. You can be as poetic as you want. If you, and again, this is an old joke of mine, but there's some truth to it. As long as something, every couple of chapters, something tries to eat the main character, you can pretty much do anything you want. And, it's the same thing with any genre form, crime fiction. As long as you have a good mystery at the heart of your crime or mystery novel that has to be solved during the course of the story, you can do anything you want. And that's why the best genre fiction is right up there with literary fiction in terms of the skill applied and the realness or realism of the characters and, the situations and all that kind of stuff. Genre fiction is not inherently dumb. Genre fiction, as I've often said, is it is a commercial market. And as a result, it spans everything from, the really intelligent stuff, the really ambitious stuff, to the stuff that's just out there because it sells to people who just kind of like anything that has dragons in it, or has dwarves whacking people with axes in it, or has, whatever. That's genre fiction, right? And so it's always kind of unfair to label genre fiction on the basis of most of it, because it's a commercial thing, it's a market, and the amount of things that happen will swell to fill that market, and that means the quality is not necessarily always great, but that's okay. The best stuff is still as good as anything else. You read J.G. Ballard in science fiction, you read any Ursula Le Guin, any number of very fine writers in fantasy and science fiction, and they're just as good as literary writers. They are perhaps penalized a bit for writing in genre, and you get these kind of articles where people go, actually so-and-so is a very good writer, as if you had just assumed, or the reviewer had just assumed, that they were some kind of hack because they were writing, And it's also, there have been times when somebody like Philip K. Dick, at a certain part in his career, he was literally writing several books a year just to make a living, and he still was coming up with absolutely brilliant ideas and strange situations and things that you would almost never see outside of the very craziest sorts of literary fiction, magic realism and things like that. But he was also writing to live, because you could actually make a living writing genre fiction, unlike most literary fiction. So as a result, there's always been this kind of prejudice against it. And I don't care about that. That's, it's too late in my writing career for me to try to fight that. But it is interesting, and it is one of the things that brings me back to what I do time and time again. So to tie this up so I can start reading, I realized that basically I don't want to be influenced by any other writers, because it won't influence me. I'll just kind of notice it, and it may, if anything, make me nervous. I'll go, oh, people will think that I copped this from such and such because it's hot, Whereas really the stuff that informs me, and I'm talking to you guys about it every week, so you beginning to have an idea of it, the stuff that really informed me started out when I was a child and hit its kind of great peak of influence when I was a teenager. and carried on into my early adulthood when I kind of started to think about writing, and in part reaction to what was being written at the time, what people were doing in the genre that I loved, and my feeling that, forgive me for my hubris, that I could do at least as well, if not better. So I don't really need to read any new stuff. I mean, I do sometimes, don't get me wrong. I certainly do. And I will blurb books sometimes and all that. And especially, obviously the ones that I like. But I don't need to stay up with the field because I am not trying to write a contemporary version of what I write. And I'm not trying to directly compete with other writers. I am still trying to exorcise both my demons and the good stuff that pushed me in this direction. When I was 11 or 12 years old and read The Lord of the Rings for the first time and was overwhelmed by the seeming realism of it, or the first time that I read the Martian Chronicles and fell in love with the poor doomed Martians, or whatever it is, what propels me forward as a writer and what I keep writing is in me already. I don't believe that I'm going to pick up anything new that is anything more than an echo of the things that already moved me and caused me to want to tell stories. So I know it sounds kind of weird, but that's where it's at. And that's what I told Deborah. And as I recall, she kind of just went, which is probably something she has to do a lot with me. Just shake her head and go, whatever. Can't argue with you. You're too set in your ways. But it's also one of the reasons that I think none of my books, I don't think any of my books feel like throwaways or like something I was writing just to fulfill a contract or just to make money, because I'm writing because of something in me that wants to be expressed. And if a story doesn't scratch that itch, I don't write it. And as a result, I may not have written as many different things as I would like to, but every single thing I have written is something I have cared about immensely when I was writing it. Because I'm not just writing to sell books. I'm writing because of this need that was inculcated in me at a young age to tell these kinds of stories in a new way or in my own way. And that's what drives me. So anyway, I didn't plan on saying all that, and I'm sure it was only partially coherent, but once I started, it was kind of like, oops, I veered off the bunny run and I'm into the black trail or whatever it's called in skiing, the one you're not supposed to get on unless you actually are a master. So I kind of veered off into that and I had to follow it through. Anyway, so one last check here and then I'm going to start reading, see if there's anybody else that needs to be said hello to. And oh, for God's sakes, this has gone away again. I see Ivan's here. Hello, Ivan. And Christy, I think I already said hello to, but why can I no longer see? Oh, okay, there they are. James has showed up. Hello, James. Claudia, Todd. That's Todd Nelson. MJ King, hello. Rochelle, I already said hello to. Jeffrey Sargent, there's a new name. Hello, Jeffrey. Good to have you with us. Tracy Barban, Rita, Patty, and Christy. Okay, I think I said hello to all those folks who had checked in one way or another. Oh, and there's Tim, and there is Medardo. Hello, Medardo. Okay, so now I'm going to read the book that I am here to read, which is More of the Sword in the Stone, which, as I have mentioned many times, was hugely influential on not so much the telling of the Dragonbone chair, but on the kinds of things that fascinated me by my desire to write a more, what I would, for lack of a better term, call a hard fantasy. Fantasy that took seriously the fact that this is pre-industrial, that there may be magic in the world because it's a fantasy world, but it's not hot and cold running magic. It's not every other person is not a wizard in training or a witch in training or what, all that kind of stuff. So, so going back to the book, Sword in the Stone, we are reading about a quest for Kay because the wart had asked Merlin if Kay couldn't be turned into something, in the same way that the wart has been turned into a fish and a bird, or at least a sitting bird. And Merlin said, no, basically, I can't. I was not given that power. I was not, his mission, his divine mission, whatever it is not to turn Kay into things and teach him. And although at the time it's not explained, we all know why that is, because the wart, real name Arthur, is a very special individual. But Wart says, is there something else that Kay could do? That Kay, could we have an adventure without turning Kay into something? And Merlin goes, actually, yes. Yes, of course. And sends them off, and they have now gone into the woods, into the forest, and they have met Robin Wood, not Robin Hood, but same character, but according to the Once and Future King, his true name is Robin Wood. And they have met Little John and Maid Marian, and they have been taken to help retrieve not only Friar Tuck, but one of the people from Sir Ector's castle, the Dog Boy, as he is called. And not coincidentally, the Dog Boy's friend, Wat, who is the crazy guy who bit the Dog Boy's nose off. So, long, complicated thing. But anyway, because they have been captured by Morgan Le Fay, the queen of the fairies, and she is holding them prisoner. So they have gone into her castle, which is made out of food, but which is absolutely unappealing to the boys. And they have, with their iron knives, they have managed to escape with the prisoners from Morgan Le Fay. And that's what's happening as I was finishing this. So I'm just going to read this last paragraph here. Oh, and Keval, the dog, who was also taken with the Dog Boy. So, continuing now and about to start chapter 12 after this paragraph. Keval contented himself with barking wildly, biting their toes, lying on his back, trying to wag his tail in that position, and generally behaving like an idiot. Now, is that a good description of a happy dog? Tad says. Yes, that is. I have happy dogs, and I've seen that. Old Wat touched his forelock. Now then, said Kay, this is my adventure, and we must get home quick. Chapter 12. But Morgan Le Fay, although in her fairy shape she could not stand iron, still had the griffin. She had cast it loose from its golden chain by a spell the moment her castle disappeared. The outlaws were pleased with their success and less careful than they should have been. They decided to take a detour round the place where they had seen the monster tied up and marched away through the darksome trees without a thought of danger. There was a noise, like a railway train letting off its whistle, and answering to it, riding on it like the voice of the Arabian bird, Robin Wood's horn of silver began to blow. Ton, ton, tavan, ton, tavan, ton, tavan, ton, ta, ton, tavan, went the horn. Moot, troot, troo-roo-root, troo-roo-root, troot, troot, tran, 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 tran. Robin was blowing his hunting music, and the ambushed archers swung round as the griffin charged. They set forward their left feet in the same movement and let fly such a shower of arrows as it had been snow. The wart saw the creature stagger in its tracks, a cloth-yard shaft sprouting from between the shoulder blades. He saw his own arrow fly wide and eagerly bent to snatch another from his belt. He saw the rank of his companion archers sway as if by a preconcerted signal when each man stooped for a second shaft. He heard the bowstrings twang again, the purr of the feathers in the air. He saw the phalanx of arrows gleam like an eye flick in the moonlight. All his life up to then he had been shooting into straw targets, which made a noise like foot. He had often longed to hear the noise that these clean and deadly missiles would make in solid flesh. He heard it. But the griffin's plates were as thick as a crocodile's, and all but the best-placed arrows glanced off. It still came on. It squealed as it came. Men began to fall, swept to the left or right by the lashing tail. The wart was fitting an arrow to his bow. The cock feather would not go right. Everything was in slow motion. He saw the huge body coming blackly through the moon glare. He felt the claw which took him in the chest. He felt himself turning somersaults slowly with a cruel weight on top of him. He saw Kay's face somewhere in the cartwheel of the universe, flushed with starlit excitement, and made Marion's on the other side with its mouth open, shouting. He thought, before he slid into blackness, that it was shouting at him. They dragged him from under the dead griffin and found Kay's arrow sticking in its eye. It had died in its leap. Then there was a time which made him feel sick, while Robin set his collarbone and made him a sling from the green cloth of his hood. And after that, the whole band lay down to sleep, dog-tired beside the body. It was too late to return to Sir Ector's castle, or even to get back to the outlaws' camp by the big tree. The dangers of the expedition were over, and all that could be done that night was to make fires, post sentries, and sleep where they were. Wart did not sleep much. He sat propped against a tree, watching the red sentries passing to and fro in the firelight, hearing their quiet passwords and thinking about the excitements of the day. These went round and round in his head, sometimes losing their proper order and happening backwards or by bits. He saw the leaping griffin, heard Marion shouting, "Good shot!" listened to the humming of the bees muddled up with the stridulation of the grasshoppers, and shot hundreds and thousands of times at popinjays which turned into griffins. Kay and the liberated dog boy slept twitching beside him, looking alien and incomprehensible as people do when they are asleep, and Keval, lying at his good shoulder, occasionally licked his hot cheeks. The dawn came slowly, so slowly and pausingly that it was impossible to determine when it really had dawned, as it does during the summer months. "Well," said Robin when they had wakened and eaten the breakfast of bread and cold venison which they had brought with them, "you will have to love us and leave us, Kay. Otherwise I shall have Sir Ector fitting out an expedition against me to fetch you back. Thank you for your help. Can I give you any little present as a reward?" "It has been lovely," said Kay. "Absolutely lovely. May I have the griffin I shot?" "He will be too heavy to carry. Why not take his head?" "That would do," said Kay, "if somebody would not mind cutting it off. It was my griffin." "What are you going to do about old Wat?" asked the wart. "It depends on what he wants us to do. Perhaps he will like to run off by himself and eat acorns, as he used to. Or if he likes to join our band, we shall be glad to have him. He ran away from your village in the first place, so I don't suppose he will care to go back there. What do you think?" "If you are going to give me a present," said the wart slowly, "I would like to have him. Do you think that would be right?" "As a matter of fact," said Robin, I don't. I don't think you can very well give people as presents. They might not like it. That is what we Saxons feel, at any rate. What did you intend to do with him?" "I don't want to keep him or anything like that. You see, we have a tutor who is a magician, and I thought he might be able to restore him to his wits." "Good boy," said Robin. "Have him by all means. I am sorry I made a mistake. At least we will ask him if he would like to go." When somebody had gone off to fetch Wat, Robin said, "You had better talk to him yourself." They brought the poor old man, smiling, confused, hideous, and very dirty, and stood him before Robin. "Go on," said Robin. The wart did not know quite how to put it, but he said, "I say, Wat, would you like to come home with me please, just for a little?" "Oh, no, said Wat, pulling his forelock, smiling, bowing, and gently waving his arms in various directions. "Come with me?" "Wanna. Dinner?" asked the wart in desperation. "Grrr!" cried the poor creature affirmatively, and his eyes glowed with pleasure at the prospect of being given something to eat. "That way," said the wart, pointing in the direction which he knew by the sun to be that of his guardian's castle. "Dinner. Come with. I take." "Meester," said Wat, suddenly remembering one word, the word which he had always been accustomed to offer to the great people who made him a present of food, his only livelihood. It was decided. "Well," said Robin, "it has been a good adventure, and I'm sorry you are going. I hope I shall see you again." "Come any time," said Marian, "if you are feeling bored. You only have to follow the glades. And you, Wart, be careful of that collarbone for a few days." "I will send some men with you to the edge of the chase," said Robin. "After that you must go by yourselves. I expect the dog boy can carry the griffin's head." "Goodbye," said Kay. "Goodbye," said Robin. "Goodbye," said Wart. "Goodbye," said Marian, smiling. "Goodbye," cried all the outlaws, waving their bows. And Kay and the wart and the dog boy and Wat and Keval and their escort set off on the long track home. They had an immense reception. The return on the previous day of all the hounds, except Keval and the dog boy, and in the evening the failure to return of Kay and Wart had set the household in an uproar. Their nurse had gone into hysterics. Hob had stayed out till midnight, scouring the purlieus of the forest. The cooks had burnt the joint for dinner, and the sergeant-at-arms had polished all the armor twice, and sharpened all the swords and axes to a razor blade in case of an invasion. At last somebody had thought of consulting Merlin, whom they had found in the middle of his third nap. The magician, for the sake of peace and quietness to go on with his rest, had used his insight to tell Sir Ector exactly what the boys were doing, where they were, and when they might be expected back. He had prophesied their return to the minute. So, when the small procession of returning warriors came within sight of the drawbridge, they were greeted by the whole household. Sir Ector was standing in the middle with a thick walking stick with which he proposed to whack them for going out of bounds and causing so much trouble. The nurse had insisted on bringing out a banner which used to be put up when Sir Ector came home for the holidays as a small boy, and this said, "Welcome home." Hob had forgotten about his beloved hawks and was standing on one side shading his eagle eyes to get the first view. The cooks and all the kitchen staff were banging pots and pans, singing "Will ye no come back again?" or some such music, out of tune. The kitchen cat was yowling. The hounds had escaped from the kennel because there was nobody to look after them and were preparing to chase the kitchen cat. The sergeant-at-arms was blowing out his chest with pleasure so far that he looked as if he might burst at any moment, and was commanding everybody in an important voice to get ready to cheer when he said, "1, 2! 1, 2! cried the sergeant. "Huzzah!" cried everybody obediently, including Sir Ector. "Look what I've got!" shouted Kay. "I've shot a griffin, and the wart has been wounded." "Yow, yow, yow!" barked all the hounds, and poured over the dog boy, licking his face, scratching his chest, and sniffing him all over to see what he had been up to, and looking hopefully at the griffin's head, which the dog boy held high in the air so that they could not eat it. "Bless my soul!" exclaimed Sir Ector. "Alas, the poor Philip Sparrow!" cried the nurse, dropping her banner. "Pity his poor arm all to brast in a green sling, God bless us!" "It is all right," said the wart. Don't catch hold of me, it hurts." "May I have it stuffed?" asked Kay. "Well, I be damned," said Hob. "Bain't thick, old chappie, or what? That erst run lunatical?" "My dear boys," said Sir Ector, "I am so glad to see you back." "Whoa, chucklehead!" exclaimed the nurse triumphantly. "Where be thy girt cudgel now?" "Hem!" said Sir Ector. "How dare you go out of bounds and put us to all this anxiety?" "It is a real griffin," said Kay, who knew there was nothing to be afraid of. "I shot dozens of them. Wart broke his collarbone. We rescued the dog boy. And what?" That comes of teaching the young how to shoot," said the sergeant proudly. Sir Ector kissed both boys and commanded the griffin to be displayed before him. "Well," he exclaimed, "what a monster! We'll have him stuffed in the dining hall. What did you say his measurements were?" 82 inches from ear to ear. Robin said it might be a record. "We shall have to get it chronicled." It is rather a good one, isn't it?" remarked Kay with studied calm. "I shall have it set up by Sir Rowland Ward," Sir Ector went on in high delight, "with a little ivory card with Kay's first griffin on it in black letters, and the date."
Raw, leave thy childishness," exclaimed the nurse. "Now, Master Art, my innocent, be off with thee to bed. Be off with thee to thy bed upon the instant. And thou, Sir Ector, let thee think shame to be playing with monsters' heads like a godwit when the poor child stays upon the point of death. Now, Sergeant, leave puffing up thy chest, sir. Stir, man, and take horse to Cardoyle for the chirurgeon." She waved her apron at the sergeant, who collapsed his chest and retreated like a shooed chicken. "It is all right," said the ward. "I tell you, it is only a broken collarbone, and Robin said it for me last night. It does not hurt a bit." "Leave the boy, nurse," commanded Sir Ector, taking sides with the men against the women, anxious to re-establish his superiority after the matter of the cudgel. "Merlin will see to him if he needs it, no doubt. Who is this Robin?" "Robin Wood," cried the boys together. "Never heard of him." "You call him Robin Hood," explained Kay in a superior tone, "but it is Wood, really, like the wood that he is the spirit of." Well, so you've been foraging with that rascal. Come in to breakfast, boys, and tell me all about him." "We have had breakfast," said the ward, "hours ago. May I please take Wat with me to see Merlin?" "Why, it's that old man who went wild and started rooting in the forest. Wherever did you get hold of him?" "The good people had captured him, with the dog boy and Kayval." "But we shot the griffin," Kay put in. I shot it myself. So now I want to see if Merlin can restore him to his wits." "Master Art," said the nurse sternly. She had been breathless up to now on account of Sir Ector's rebuke. "Master Art, thy room and thy bed is where thou art tending to, and that this instant. Wold fools may be wold fools, whether by yea or by nay, but I hain't served the family for 50 years without a learning of my duty. A flibbity-gibbeting about with a lot of want-wits, when thy own arm may be dropping to the floor. Yes, thou, wold turkey-cock," she added, turning fiercely upon Sir Ector, "and thou canst keep thy magician away from the poor mite's room till he be rested, that thou canst. A wantoning with monsters and lunaticals," continued the victor as she led her helpless captive from the stricken field. "I never heard the like." "Please someone to tell Merlin to look after Wat," cried the victim over his shoulder in diminishing tones. He woke up in his cool bed, feeling better. The old fire-eater who looked after him had covered the windows with a curtain, so that the room was dark and comfortable, but he could tell by the one ray of golden sunlight which shot across the floor that it was late afternoon. He not only felt better, he felt very well, so well that it was not possible to stay in bed. He moved quickly to throw back the sheet, but stopped with a hiss at the creak or scratch of his shoulder, which he had forgotten in his sleep. Then he got out more carefully by sliding down the bed and pushing himself upright with one hand, shoved his bare feet into a pair of slippers, and managed to wrap a dressing gown more or less around him. He padded off through the stone passages, up the worn circular stairs, to find Merlin. When he reached the schoolroom, he found that Kay was continuing his first-rate education. He was doing dictation, for as Wart opened the door, he heard Merlin pronouncing in measured tones the famous medieval mnemonic, Bara bara, celarent dariae ferioque prioris, and Kay saying, "Wait a bit, my pen has gone all squeegee." "Oh, you will catch it," remarked Kay to the Wart when they saw him. "You are supposed to be in bed, dying of gangrene or something." "Merlin," said the Wart, "what have you done with Wat?" "You should try to speak without assonances," said the wizard. "For instance, the beer is never clear near here, dear, is unfortunate, even as an assonance. And then again, your sentence is ambiguous, to say the least of it. What, I might reply, taking it to be a conundrum, or if I were King Pellinore, what? Nobody can be too careful about their habits of speech." Kay had evidently been doing his dictation well, and the old gentleman was in a good humor. "You know what I mean," said the Wart. "What have you done with the old man, with no nose?" "He has cured him," said Kay. "Well," said Merlin, "you might call it that, and then again you might not. Of course, when one has lived in the world as long as I have, and backwards at that, one does learn to know a thing or two about pathology. The wonders of analytical psychology and plastic surgery are, I am afraid, to this generation, but a closed book." "What did you do to him?" "Oh, I just psychoanalyzed him," replied the magician grandly. "That, and of course I sewed a new nose on both of them." "What kind of nose?" asked the Wart. "It is too funny," said Kay. "He wanted to have the griffin's nose for one, but I would not let him. So then he took the noses off the young pigs which we were going to have for supper and used those. Personally, I think they will grunt." "A ticklish operation," said Merlin, "but a successful one." "Well," said the Wart doubtfully, "I hope it will be all right. What did they do then?" "They went off to the kennels. Old Wat is very sorry for what he did to the dog boy, but he says he can't remember having done it. He says that suddenly everything went black when they were throwing stones once, and he can't remember anything since. The dog boy forgave him and said he did not mind a bit. They are going to work together in the kennels in the future and not think of what is past any more. The dog boy says that the old man was good to him while they were prisoners of the fairy queen, and that he knows he ought not to have thrown stones at him in the first place. He says he often thought about that when the other boys were throwing stones at him." "Well," said the Wart, "I'm glad it has all turned out for the best. Do you think I could go and visit them?" "For heaven's sake, don't do anything to annoy your nurse," exclaimed Merlin, looking about him anxiously. "That old woman hit me with a broom when I came to see you this forenoon, and broke my spectacles. Could you not wait until tomorrow?" On the morrow, Wat and the dog boy were the firmest of friends. Their common experiences of being stoned by the mob and then tied to columns of pork by Morgan Le Fay served as a bond and a topic of reminiscence as they lay among the dogs at night for the rest of their lives. Also, by the morning they had both pulled off the noses which Merlin had kindly given them. They explained that they had got used to having no noses now, and anyway they preferred to live with the dogs. Chapter 13. In spite of his protests, the unhappy invalid was confined to his chamber for 3 mortal days. He was alone, except at bedtime, when Kay came, and Merlin was reduced to shouting his edication through the keyhole at times when the nurse was known to be busy with her washing. The boy's only amusement was the ant nests, the ones between glass plates, which had been brought when he first came from Merlin's cottage in the forest. "Can't you," he howled miserably under the door, "turn me into something while I'm locked up like this?" "I can't get the spells through the keyhole." "Through the what?" "The keyhole." "Oh." "Are you there?" "Yes." What? What? Confusion take this shouting, exclaimed the magician, stamping on his hat. May Castor and Pollux... No, no, not again. God bless my blood pressure. Could you turn me into an ant? A what? An ant! It would be a small spell for ants, wouldn't it? It would go through the keyhole. I don't think we ought to. Why? They are dangerous. You could watch with your insight and turn me back again if it got too bad. Please turn me into something or I shall go weak in the head. The ants are not our Norman ones, dear boy. They come from the Afric shore. They are belligerent. I don't know what belligerent is. There was a long silence behind the door. Well, said Merlin eventually, it is far too soon in your education, but you would have had to do it sometime. Let me see. Are there 2 nests in that contraption? There are 2 pairs of plates. Take a rush from the floor and lean it between the 2 nests, like a bridge. Have you done that? Yes. The place where he was seemed like a great field of boulders, with a flattened fortress at one end of it, between the glass plates. The fortress was entered by tunnels in the rock, and over the entrance to each tunnel there was a notice which said, "Everything not forbidden is compulsory." He read the notice with dislike, though he did not understand its meaning. He thought to himself, I will explore a little before going in. For some reason, the notice gave him a reluctance to go, making the rough tunnel look sinister. He waved his antennae carefully, considering the notice, assuring himself of his new senses, planting his feet squarely in the insect world as if to brace himself in it. He cleaned his antennae with his 4 feet, frisking and smoothing them so that he looked like a Victorian villain twirling his mustachios. He yawned, for ants do yawn, and stretched themselves, too, like human beings. Then he became conscious of something which had been waiting to be noticed, that there was a noise in his head which was articulate. It was either a noise or a complicated smell, and the easiest way to explain it is to say that it was like a wireless broadcast. It came through his antennae. The music had a monotonous rhythm, like a pulse, and the words which went with it were about June, moon, noon, spoon, or mammy, 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 or ever, never, or blue, true, you. He liked them at first, especially the ones about love, dove, above, until he found that they did not vary. As soon as they had been finished once, they were begun again. After an hour or 2, they began to make him feel sick inside. There was a voice in his head also during the pauses of the music, which seemed to be giving directions. All 2 days old will be moved to the west aisle, it would say, or number 210397/WD will report to the soup squad in replacement for 333105/WD who has fallen off the nest. It was a fruity voice, but it seemed somehow impersonal, as if its charm were an accomplishment that had been practiced, like a circus trick. It was dead. The boy, or perhaps we ought to say the ant, walked away from the fortress as soon as he was prepared to walk about. He began exploring the desert of boulders uneasily, reluctant to visit the place from which the orders were coming, yet bored with the narrow view. He found small pathways among the boulders, wandering tracks both aimless and purposeful, which led toward the grain store, and also in various other directions which he could not understand. One of these paths ended at a clod with a natural hollow underneath it. Sorry, they've got a wrong word here, so I'm just trying to figure out. At the hollow, again with the strange appearance of aimless purpose, he found 2 dead ants. They were laid there tidily but yet untidily, as if a very tidy person had taken them to the place but had forgotten the reason when he got there. They were curled up and did not seem to be either glad or sorry to be dead. They were there, like a couple of chairs. While he was looking at the corpses, a live ant came down the pathway carrying a third one. It said, "Hail, Barbaras!" The boy said, "Hail," politely. In one respect of which he knew nothing, he was lucky. Merlin had remembered to give him the proper smell for the nest, for if he had smelled of any other nest, they would have killed him at once. If Miss Edith Cavell had been an ant, they would have had to write on her statue, "Smell is not enough." The new ant put down the cadaver vaguely and began dragging the other 2 in various directions. It did not seem to know where to put them, or rather it knew that a certain arrangement had to be made, but it could not figure out how to make it. It was like a man with a teacup in one hand and a sandwich in the other who wants to light a cigarette with a match. But where the man would invent the idea of putting down the cup and sandwich before picking up the cigarette and the match, this ant would have put down the sandwich and picked up the match. Then it would have been down with the match and up with the cigarette, then down with the cigarette and up with the sandwich, then down with the cup and up with the cigarette, until finally it had to put down the sandwich and pick up the match. It was inclined to rely on a series of accidents to achieve its object. It was patient and did not think. When it had pulled the 3 dead ants into several positions, they would fall into line under the clod eventually, and that was its duty. Wart watched the arrangements with a surprise which turned into vexation and then into dislike. He felt like asking why it did not think things out in advance, the annoyed feeling which people have on seeing a job being badly done. Later, he began to wish that he could put several other questions, such as, "Do you like being a sexton?" Or, "Are you a slave?" Or even, "Are you happy?" The extraordinary thing was that he could not ask these questions. In order to ask them, he would have had to put them into ant language through his antennae, and he now discovered, with a helpless feeling, that there were no words for the things he wanted to say. There were no words for happiness, for freedom, for liking, nor were there any words for their opposites. He felt like a dumb man trying to shout fire. The nearest he could get to right or wrong was to say done or not done. The ant finished fiddling with its corpses and turned back down the pathway, leaving them in the haphazard order. It found that the wart was in its way, so it stopped, waving its wireless aerials at him as if it were a tank. With its mute, menacing helmet of a face and its hairiness, and the things like spurs on the front leg joint, perhaps it was more like a knight in armor on an armored horse, or like a combination of the two, a hairy centaur in armor. It said, "Hail, Barbaras," again. "Hail! What are you doing?" The boy answered truthfully, "I am not doing anything." It was baffled by this, for several seconds, as you would be if Einstein had told you his latest ideas about space. Then it extended the 12 joints of its aerial and spoke past him into the blue. It said, 105,978/UDC reporting from Square 5. There is an insane ant on Square 5. Over to you. The word it used for insane was not done. Later on, the wart discovered that there were only 2 qualifications in the language, done and not done, which applied to all questions of value. If the seeds which the collectors found were sweet, they were done seeds. If somebody had doctored them with corrosive sublimate, they would have been not done seeds. And that was that. Even the moons, mammies, doves, etc. in the broadcasts were completely described when they were stated to be done ones. The broadcast stopped for a moment, and the fruity voice said, GHQ replying to 105978/UDC, what is its number? Over. The ant asked, what is your number? I don't know. When this news had been exchanged with headquarters, a message came back to ask whether he could give an account of himself. The ant asked him. It used the same words as the broadcaster had used and in the same voice. This made Wart feel uncomfortable and angry, two emotions which he disliked. Yes, he said, sarcastically, for it was obvious that the creature could not detect sarcasm. I have fallen on my head and can't remember anything about it. 105978/UDC reporting not done. Ant has a blackout from falling off the nest. Over. GHQ replying to 105978/UDC not done. Ant is number 42436/WD who fell off the nest this morning while working with MASH squad. If it is competent to continue its duties. Competent to continue its duties was easier in the ant speech, for it was simply done, like everything else that was not done. But enough of the language question. If it is competent to continue its duties, instruct 42436/WD to rejoin MASH squad, relieving 210021/WD who was sent to replace it. Over. The creature repeated the message. It seemed that he could not have made a better explanation than this one about falling on his head, even if he had meant to, for the ants did occasionally tumble off. They were a species of ant called Mesor barbarus. Very well. The sexton paid no further attention to him, but crawled off down the path for another body, or for anything else that needed to be scavenged. The wart took himself away in the opposite direction to join the MASH squad. He memorized his own number and the number of the unit who had to be relieved. The MASH squad were standing in one of the outer chambers of the fortress like a circle of worshippers. He joined the circle, announcing that 210021/WD was to return to the main nest. Then he began filling himself with the sweet mash, like the others. They made it by scraping the seeds which others had collected, chewing up the scrapings till they made a kind of paste or soup, and then swallowing it into their own crops. At first it was delicious to him, so that he ate greedily, but in a few seconds it began to be unsatisfactory. He could not understand why. He chewed and swallowed busily, copying the rest of the squad, but it was like eating a banquet of nothing, or like a dinner party on the stage. In a way, it was like a nightmare in which you might continue to consume huge masses of putty without being able to stop. There was a coming and going round the pile of seeds. The ants who had filled their crops to the brim were walking back to the inner fortress, to be replaced by a procession of empty ants who were coming from the same direction. There were never any new ants in the procession, only the same dozen going backward and forward, as they would do during all their lives. He realized suddenly that what he was eating was not going into his stomach. A small proportion of it had penetrated to his private self at the beginning, and now the main mass was being stored in a kind of upper stomach, or crop, from which it could be removed. It dawned on him at the same time that when he joined the westward stream, he would have to disgorge the store into a larder or something of the sort. The MASH squad conversed with each other while they worked. He thought this was a good sign at first and listened to pick up what he could. "Oh, hark," one of them would say. "Here comes that mammy, mammy, mammy song again. I do think that mammy, mammy, mammy song is loverly." Done. "It is so high class." Done. Another would remark, "I do think our beloved leader is wonderful, don't you? They say she was stung 300 times in the last war and was awarded the Ant Cross for valor. How lucky we are to be born in the A nest, don't you think? And wouldn't it be awful to be one of those horrid bees? Wasn't it awful about 310099/WD? Of course, he was executed at once by special order of our beloved leader. Oh, hark! Here comes that mammy, 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 mammy song again. I do think. He walked away to the nest with a full gorge, leaving them to do the round again. They had no news, no scandal, nothing to talk about. Novelties did not happen to them. Even the remarks about the executions were in a formula, and only varied as to the registration number of the criminal. When they had finished with the mammy, 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 they had to go on to the beloved leader, and then to the filthy, barbarous bee, and to the latest execution. It went round in a circle. Even the beloved's, wonderfuls, luckies, and so on were all dones, and the awfuls were not dones. Okay, and we're going to stop there because the wart still has a bit of more of his depressing visit to the ant nest. The ant farm, I guess we would call it in modern day parlance. So let me check that. Okay, and so I think, with that, I am going to wrap it up for the night, and I will be back next week, and we will continue with Wart's adventure. I was wrong. I remember there was a being changed into something tonight. I think I put on the title, or the whatever you call it, of this evening's reading, that it was possibly the geese. No, the geese come later. Geese are most people, certainly mine's, one of our favorite parts. Anyway, but the ants are depressing. And we still have a little bit more of the ants to go. So with that, I will plead with you to take good care of yourselves over the coming week. I will be back, as far as I know, next week, and we may have to deal with daylight savings, but I will announce that on the Facebook page. I very much appreciate you joining me. As always, it is a huge pleasure to share this time with you guys. And so take good care of yourselves. Take good care of your friends and loved ones. Look around for people that might need a kind word or a little help carrying something or whatever, because the world can be a difficult place sometimes, and we all need to help each other. And with that, I say peace, and I hope you all have a great week, and I will talk to you very soon. So thanks, and ciao, bambini.